Singularity.
My name is Nicola, and you're watching Singularity FM, the place where we interview the future. If you enjoy this podcast, you can show your support by leaving a review on iTunes or by becoming a patron at interviewthefuture.com. My guest is Steven Kotler. Kotler is an award winning author and the founder of the Flow Research Collective, widely recognized for his work on flow states, neuroscience, and peak performance. This is our third interview, and even though the last one was 14 years ago, I highly recommend you check out those previous conversations as we'll try to repeat as little as possible. Today, we will focus on Steven's latest book, We Are as Gods, a survival guide for the age of abundance. So, welcome to Singularity FM, Steven.
Thanks. It's nice to see you again.
Very nice to see you again. It's been a long time, so we have a lot to catch up on. And let's jump right in. Is this book, We Are as Gods, a kind of the sequel to Abundance?
Partially, yes. So every one of my books with Peter has come out of Peter trying to solve a problem, me trying to solve a problem. Where those problems tend to meet is our book. On Peter's side, it's this absolute extension of Abundance. Peter, when we wrote Abundance in 2010, 2011, as you may remember, at the back of that book, there are about 60 pages worth of charts, right? I think two a page, so 120 charts. Peter had been tracking those. Those are right abundance metrics, to use the phrase that we coined, right? And we were tracking kind of the rate of change in the world, the spread of exponential technologies, its ability to solve grand global challenges. We can get into the numbers if you want to, but let's just say everything kept trending up, and in sort of wild ways. We were actually tracking the numbers and looking. The numbers were nuts. And Peter kept calling me and saying, "Dude, you gotta look at these numbers with me. Like everybody's talking about the world getting worse, but I'm looking at the data, and it's overwhelmingly getting better. We need to get this story out." That was sort of Peter's half of the book. So he was very much sort of looking at a continuation of abundance. In a sense, I was more looking at a problem that might have gotten sort of outlined loosely and touched upon in bold. That was my half. Was I was looking at all the challenges we now face because we have abundance, right? There's a dark side to abundance that goes along with it. We have an abundance of smartness in our machines, right? There's an abundance of AI. It's leading to an abundance of technological unemployment, fears of technological unemployment. We have an abundance of carbon in our atmosphere as the byproduct of an abundance of energy. So we've moved towards this world of abundance, but there's a dark side. And looking at how do you fix the dark side, it was very clear to me that the killer app for the 21st century had to be cooperation at scale. How do we cooperate at scale, right? Whether it's rogue AI or manufactured pandemics or take your pick, the solution has to involve all of us. And I was looking at ways technology enabled that. My lab had been working on some very sort of cutting edge technologies that deal with how the brain cooperates, and we were a lot farther than I thought we were going to be. We saw examples of people collaborating during COVID over technology that were wider spread and more powerful than anything we had seen before. And all of this said, "Oh wow, this crazy idea is actually starting to become possible." And where those two things meet is sort of we are as gods.
Wow, that's so fascinating. So for Peter, there was the dissatisfaction perhaps that the abundance story is still not getting loud enough. And we'll talk about that on the one hand. And he wanted to bring more data to push that story even further and upfront, despite the news cycle and everything like that. And you, on the other hand, wanted to address what you refer to as the dark side of abundance, which are kind of, if you want to say, negative externalities even, perhaps is a way of putting it, of abundance, and kind of resolve those two issues simultaneously together in a book that you co-wrote with Peter. Okay, so before we jump into the title and start breaking things down, and of course, I really love or I really appreciate, I should say, is the right word, the dark side of abundance, where you spend a lot of time on it in your book. I was quite impressed by it because I was planning to push you on that end. And then when I saw it's in the book, I was like, darn, he's already preempted me. But let's start first of all with your thesis. What is your thesis in your book?
I think if there's a core thesis, so let's say part one, part two. Part one is we said abundance is coming. It's here at scale with a vengeance, both good and bad, right? And this part one of this is the scale is so much more immense than I think any of us considered. I will tell you that I've read that book more than any other human being alive, right? Because Peter and I trade chapters back and forth most of the time, but I handle most of the editing and the rewriting and the polishing. So I've probably read that book 1,000 times. Every time I read the first 4 chapters, which sort of outline what's coming, right? Some of the psychological problems, some of the neurobiological issues, but it's really a look at this is what's coming at scale. Every time I read it, I don't know what your experience was, I find it shocking. I've been tracking this stuff. I'm sort of an expert in this stuff. I know all the details, but when you put it side by side and you look at it that way, I still find it shocking. So I think part one is really that message. And part two is, hey, we have sort of Stone Age cognition trying to keep pace with space age technology, and we are failing. And the evidence for that failure is sort of everywhere you could possibly look right now. The good news is, over the past 20 years, a lot of the work I've been doing has been to found the field of performance neuroscience. A lot of what that field is founded upon, a lot of what we've discovered over the past 20 years, and the first textbook in that field, by the way, is coming out in July, and I wrote it along with a couple of other people, is very, very applicable in a world of incredible speed, incredible scale, and incredible uncertainty. So the core thesis is, hey, abundance is here with a vengeance. We have to upgrade our cognitive operating system to keep pace. And good news, we actually have everything we need to do that. It's been discovered over the past 20 years, and we actually have the tools at our disposal.
I see. So, okay, I was planning to come back to it a little bit later, but let's cover the abundance, what I would refer to as the abundance foundation, before we then jump right in here, because it's kind of relevant. Uh, it's been over a decade since the original abundance book, and I wanted to ask you, which of the core claims, in your opinion, have not aged well?
Oh, so yeah, there's a couple of them that we talk about a lot. So the first is we opened the damn book in Masdar, the city of the future that never got built, right? So the most glaring one is that didn't happen. The one that I think was the biggest miss, and not just us, I think a lot of people missed on it, was biofuels. And how fat and honestly, it was hard not to bet on Craig Venter at the time. He was the main proponent. He was in there. He had just cracked the human genome. He was the good bet. It made a lot of sense. I remember sitting with him and Peter and talking through biofuels. I remember talking to other biofuel experts along the way, and that's the one. And we're finally starting to get interesting places with some of those technologies, by the way, right? But the developmental curve was a lot slower. And I think the other one that I still like, this joke is on me. I have known Jared Lanier since the 90s. I remember Mondo 2000. I have been a VR guy going all the way back. I wrote, this is a crazy story that not many people know, but I actually wrote the very first script, the very first multi-branching video game that ran off biofeedback. So nobody had invented a branching video game script at that point. Like it was totally no, it was like early 1991. I remember like filling whiteboards, just trying to figure out, it was basically, okay, we were like, okay, this is sort of like Mad Libs and sort of like nobody knew what we were doing. Like it had never been done. And to add a biofeedback layer was totally crazy. But we tried, the company failed. Obviously we were 25 years too early or 30 years too early. You can now start to do that stuff today. And actually my organization is doing some of that stuff because it's very useful in training, like using flow to treat PTSD and mental health disorders and things like that. You can now do some of that stuff. But it was amazing. We were 25 years, 30 years too early. It wasn't possible. But I was, obviously a big fan of these technologies, and here we are. And, I like to say that the metaverse, as far as I can tell, is Mark Zuckerberg's magic underwear and really doesn't exist anyplace else. And I always point out when people start screaming about AI is coming and AI this and AI that, I'm sure we're going to get into it. I'm like, guys, are you sure? Because the metaverse, Bitcoin, blockchain, biofuels. These are technologies that shoot up with massive amounts of hype. And it's not that they haven't blown us away and continue to sort of blow us away. It's that the extremes are never what happens, and we tend to walk a middle path. And I think that's the same thing going on with AI right now, right? There were huge news about AI is coming for our job, but if you're paying attention to coding, which is where it got hit first, they're starting to hire coders back, right? Everybody got laws. We're not hiring when coders. We're firing them now. It's 3 months in, and people are hiring those coders back.
Yeah, to be honest, my favorite, I've read probably 4 books of yours. Unfortunately, I haven't read any of your fictional books, but I've read many of your nonfiction books. My favorite is The Rise of Superman, the Flow book, which was really fantastic. Unfortunately, I don't have it here with me because I gave it to a skateboarder friend of mine who's really loving it.
Thank you.
But in terms of things that I would like to challenge you to reconsider, I want to suggest perhaps one smaller thing and one bigger thing, and you tell me if you agree with me.
Okay, hit me.
So, the original Abundance placed great hope in what you called the techno-philanthropists. And the idea, I believe, has taken some serious beating. Many would now call those same figures the new robber barons. Has your view of them changed? And I mean, Elon Musk might be the prototypical example of that.
So this is you raise a great. It's funny because Peter and I, and we're open about this. We always talk about this. There are places we disagree, right? And there are times where Peter wins the argument, and there are times when I win the argument, and there are times when we present both of our arguments, right? We've done that throughout, and I was a journalist. I distrust wealth and money innately, right? So when Peter started talking about, and so I was nervous about those pronunciations. I'm still nervous about those pronunciations. But here's the big but. Elon, Jeff Bezos pushed, and Peter really pushed space farther than anybody privately. And you can also say the exact sort of things about Bill Gates and vaccine developments, or Bill Gates, Microsoft, and what they've done. Most people don't actually realize this, but some of the most cutting edge environmental work of the past 20 years has happened inside of Microsoft. It's been their teams. So yes, I hear everything you're saying, and I'm the first person to tell you that I think social media broke the world, period. Like, I think social media broke the world, and I've made this statement for a long time, and a lot of those people made their wealth off social media, and I find a lot of that challenging. But so it depends how we're measuring. Right? It really depends how we're measuring. It also perhaps depends a little bit on history. I hear your point. I think you're you're right. I think it's a good point. I don't disagree with you. I had issues here the first time around, but still, like I came out, I listened to Peter, and it was really, I will tell you, it was like it was sitting and listening to Dean Kamen that actually shifted where I was like, and Dean is so powerful and hard to argue with in a sense, like just being around him and what he's accomplished. That, and I still think, if anything is true, is that maybe it's because a little bit of the rhetoric of abundance, but like a lot of very, very wealthy people were sort of told they have to use their money to solve grand global challenges. And we did see that. And I mean, the funding of all the X prizes, there were like 3 or 4 X prizes that had been funded when we wrote Abundance, maybe 5. I mean, I think it's over 100 at this point, and they're going after all these grand global challenges, and that's all money donated. So I get your point. I get the other side of it, which, I think is just equally as valid. And if I could go back, I probably would have put some of my skepticism, a little more of my skepticism in there. But the other thing that you have to sort of remember, and it sounds funny now, but if you look at our books, the first book, Abundance, is written from Peter's point of view. And that actually, like, in the beginning, people were like, were you Peter's ghostwriter? I said, no, not at all. Actually, Peter didn't want to write it that way. And I said, no, man, we can't, like, Peter hadn't done enough. I hadn't done enough visibly in the public to be like, Peter and Steven saved the world. Nobody was going to believe that. But if Peter went on a voyage of discovery and like discovered all this, it was a much more believable argument. And I thought the argument mattered more. I thought it was more important to make the argument for the world than to insert myself into the argument. So because the book came from Peter's perspective, and that was my choice. And Peter was really funny. He's like, you're going to take a lot of a big PR hit. And I was like, I know, but I'll get it back in the end. It'll be fine. The message is more important. And it worked out. It was a lucky bet. It worked out. But some of the stuff like that you're pointing at, yes, like known issue. I sort of agree. There were a bunch of decisions made around thinking like that. So it wasn't made aimlessly. Your concerns were there. They're still there with me. And by the way, I still have a lot of those same concerns today.
That's why I love talking to you, because, to be honest with you, I struggle with Peter a lot, with his personality, and my interactions with him have been complicated. With you, I don't know if it's the dog sanctuary. I don't know what the hell it is, but I feel you at a lot more humane level and personal level, and I believe you genuinely a lot better. Um,
I want to say something. I'm not. I know Peter as well as any other human being alive. We've been very close for 30 years. He is one of the most genuine and authentic people. I know. Like you can criticize him for stuff for sure, but he's really Peter. He is very, very, very much Peter, and he's not apologetic for it. And I sort of love that about him.
So let's talk about the bigger issue here, perhaps from my point of view, and please help correct me. Feel free to correct it. So um, the book, if I remember, because it's been like 14 years to be honest, but the original book Abundance argued that abundance requires capital, the right people, which you called at the time the techno philanthropists, but let's call it the right people, and the right technology. And then those things would hopefully create abundance. They would create a future that is better than we think. So, looking back, and I can tell you a whole story perhaps about how me and my wife took a road trip from Scottsdale, Arizona, all throughout California about 6 months after your book came out. And I was basically shocked by the level of crime and poverty and environmental destruction that we witnessed all over California. And I was thinking, well, if there's any other place in the world that has more capital, more technology, and more of these techno philanthropists in the world, I don't know what that place is. But it seems to me that other places in the world, like Canada or even the Nordic countries, that have definitely less than all of these ingredients, they live a longer life. So, for example, the average Canadian lives 3.5 years longer than the average American. They have a happier life, both objectively and subjectively. They have less violent lives based on the statistics of crime with respect to the different countries, especially violent crime and armed violent crime. And finally, we have access or easier access to healthcare, despite the fact that, by the way, the States spends maybe double the money on healthcare than Canada does. And so it seemed to me that that thesis of these things as the ingredients is at best incomplete. That's to say, missing something.
Okay, so I'm gonna let me respond to this. Let me also say
Please.
the first half of what I'm gonna say, I know what I'm talking about. I try very hard to stay in my lane. I have expertise in certain things, and there's stuff I don't do. So there's a lot of political stuff. Well, I don't do it. It's above my pay grade. It's not what I work on. And I've always say, if you're talking about a problem and you're not actually working to solve it, you're just gossiping. And I don't gossip. So I want to. With that said, I hear everything you're saying, but you're at the in a sense, you're at the wrong scale. And this is something we said in the Buddies. We said, look, at the local level, there's going to be upheavals. There's going to be different things that change all this. We're tracking sort of global metrics. In the 12 years between when that book came out and today, 200 million people have escaped from extreme poverty. It's the largest poverty drop in history. 1 billion people gained access to electricity, 2 billion gained access to clean drinking water, and the number of smartphones, so communication and compute, has gone from 1 billion to 7 billion. That's astounding. That's what we were talking about. What the promise of abundance was, we can use exponentially accelerating technology to meet or exceed the basic needs of every man, woman, and child on the planet. That was the promise of abundance. And the forces you're talking about were secondary forces driving that forward. And from a drive perspective, the techno-philanthropists, you may not like their term. They may not have turned out to be very philanthropic in the end, but they certainly put their money where their mouth was, and they drove these things forward. And the results, if you're looking globally, there's something really interesting going on. To defend the American experience, or the American experiment, as I like to talk about it, the only thing I'd like to point out here, and I think everything you pointed at is totally real. I would also like to point out at the fact that, like, democracy and capitalism at scale is a brand new freaking experiment. Nobody had tried it. America tried it. And the fact that, like, we get it wrong as much as we get it right should be surprising to no one. It's a 250-year-old experiment being run at a scale nobody's tried. Like, it's amazing. It's still hanging together, let alone functioning as well as it sometimes can function. You know, that, like, that's what so I have a very historical view and global view when I look at these things. And that's what I'm interested in mostly. And there's, in terms of happiness, you're pointing out a very well-known psychological phenomenon, which is happiness comes from, I want to be doing slightly better than my neighbors. And kind of, that's really what it is. So you're pointing at smaller countries with less of a wealth gap, right? Because there's less extremes. Now, it turns out that the peculiar wiring of the brain around money and social networks and things like that leads to that effect among money. There's a lot of other variables in happiness, but that's a big one, and that's the economist's work and a bunch of other people's work. And funny too, also, right? Tells us a lot about our primate past.
Okay, let's jump into the new book. Enough about abundance. Let's start with the title itself. Both the Greek and the Norse gods end up destroying themselves in a great war against each other. So when you and Peter say we are as gods, is that a promise, an aspiration, or a warning?
Okay, so this is why the cover of the book matters so much, right? If you look at the cover, you've got a computer enter thing, right? First of all, full quote. We are as gods comes from a quote from Stuart Brand, founder of the Whole Earth Catalog, original married prankster, brilliant thinker on technology, founder of the Long Now Foundation, etc. He's we are as gods, and we might as well get good at it. This was in 1968, and he was talking about tools and technology. In 1968, we did not yet have godlike technology, right? That just wasn't. But we are now in 2026, and as you know from reading the book, in the beginning of the book, I went through the Bible. There are 83 biblical miracles in the Old Testament. They fall into roughly 10 categories. There's healing miracles and creation out of nothing miracles and provision miracles and so forth. And we took all those categories and then we ran all of modern technologies through them and said, well, what qualifies? The results in the book is 6 pages and they're single spaced, right? So it's a long freaking list. The actual list was 12 pages and I cut it in half and tried to condense it down because it was just like nobody was going to read 12 pages of godlike technology, right? So I cut it in half, but we have moved it. We don't talk about it as godlike technology. Nobody says, I have omnipresence, but everybody's like, yeah, I'll see you on Zoom. It's the same thing, right? We don't say I have omniscience. We say I got Google and ChatGPT. It's roughly the same thing. The one that blows me away, because I was in the room the first time it got turned on, was artificial vision. And artificial vision, the first bionic eye. And that, this is such a classic biblical miracle. It's New Testament, not Old Testament, but it's literally like in the New Testament, they use it as proof of Jesus's divinity, right? Like they testify in court that he restored to them. This is like proof that you're God. And I was in the room when the first time one of these was turned on. It was a radical one-off experiment, and it worked. It was amazing. Literally, the blind man, totally blind in his eyes for 20 years. 2 days later, he was driving a car around a parking lot and not hitting anything. It was amazing. And I'm watching it. And now that's at scale, right? Now that's coming to scale and it's being used to cure macular degeneration, which impacts, if I get my numbers quickly, it's 170 to 180 million people a year. That's a biblical miracle, flat out. That's just a biblical miracle. There's no other way around it. So we are as gods is sort of a true statement if you're looking at our technology. But none of us, Peter and I, never meant it as a brag. In fact, the cover was designed by Peter's wife, who's a fantastic designer and designed the cover of Abundance. But it was because when we turned it to the publisher, they thought it was a brag. And we were like, no, this is we mean it as a dare, maybe, a provocation, perhaps, definitely a warning. But it's also, and this is, I think, the most important point, is the one you left out, it's a choice. We're the ones building this. We're the ones doing this. This is not happening to us. These are our choices. We're making these choices. Now, mind you, we have godlike technology and cognition that hasn't been upgraded in a couple million years, and that's the problem, which is why the second half of the title is a survival guide for the age of abundance. So it's a great question. Thank you for answering. And I gave you the very long story, give you a long answer.
No, it's very good and it's very revealing. And I love that you added, so in a way you answered positively that it's a promise, it's an aspiration, it's a warning in a positive way. It's kind of like a stating of a fact without bragging. So I like your answer a lot there, but let's jump into the subtitle because you already started. A survival guide for the age of abundance. Now, survival guides are usually for ages of scarcity and danger, not for abundance. So if abundance is so good, why do we need to have a guide to survive it?
Yeah,
so wouldn't it be just a walk in the park?
It's a great question. So I said earlier, right, that we haven't our cognition hasn't been upgraded in a really long time. So I'm going to go into a lot of detail here, but let me just sort of start at the simple high level. So we got an old brain in a new world. What does that mean? It basically means we're trying to navigate modern mazes with prehistoric maps, and there's a mismatch, right? And I think it's the central tension of the 21st century. The world's accelerating, the brain is not. Here's the fine print. Our ancestors, as you just pointed out, they evolved in a world of scarcity of limits, right? Limited calories, limited information, limited opportunity. And scarcity shapes our biology, shapes our brain for millions of years. It teaches the brain 5 foundational habits. And this is where we start to get into the issue. The first is the brain is primed to over detect threat. Because in the world of old, right, if the bushes are shaking and your brain doesn't go, oh shit, tiger in the bushes, you could die, right? And the danger of getting it wrong is I wasted some energy on a false positive, but I didn't die, right? So the brain makes that trade-off. The problem is when you over-detect threat, you let too much fear into the system for complicated neurobiological reasons that this causes us to under-detect opportunity. When we're scared, we want safe and secure solutions. We don't want novel solutions. The brain starts to prefer very strongly the familiar over the novel, right? This happens all over the place. We want to conserve energy at all costs, right? The first order of the brain is always efficiency, and we collapse complexity into simpler narratives. So the classic example right now that we're seeing everywhere is apocalyptic thinking. Oh my God, it's the end of the world, right? Like that's what happens, right? That's what the brain does in the face of overwhelming complexity. So one, we need a survival guide in a sense to save us from our hardwiring, from our original coding. I can go into much more detail, and we should talk about information overload. We should talk about what that does to the brain and all that stuff, but we can go there in a bit. I'll stop here and let you ask your next question.
Yeah, and I think maybe it was Jung who pointed out that when the archetypes are falling apart, we feel the apocalypse is here, kind of like.
So no, it's a chain of events. So Jung gets involved in it. So you got to start with a simple thing. How does the brain make sense of complexity, right? We got a super fast world. In fact, we didn't talk about this, but it's just worth mentioning. And this is one of these calculations where you have to, like, a little grain of salt here on the math, but we tried to be as conservative as possible. The question was, man, how much faster is the world moving than when we wrote Abundance to today, right? Like that was a question Peter and I were asking really in the beginning. And so I was like, well, we can actually probably compute this. And I wanted to look at, look at like life-altering technologies like the spread of smartphones, right? The spread of the internet, stuff that like was really obvious. So we took, I think, 20 of those. And then we looked at the spread of really big social cultural shifts that are like really wild and coming. So this could be everything from the remote work, which totally changed over the past decade, to same-sex marriage, and and those kinds of transgender rights and whatnot. And you could track those things. And what we found is that the world is moving. And this is, again, as I said, we tried to be as conservative. You can see the calculation on the back of it, but it's 286% faster today than it was in 2012, right? So when we talk about complexity in the world, that's just a small picture of it. So the brain always uses analogies to make sense of complexity, right? A lot of people, Douglas Hofstadter said, analogies are the root of thinking, intelligence, creativity. Metaphors, similes, like this thing is like this thing, or this thing is, I'm as hungry as a bear. Like those are analogies. They help us make sense of complexity. When analogies fail, and this is when we get to Jung pointed out that we turn to archetypes. Archetypes is a way to reduce the complex into the complicated. And here's where it gets funny. If you measure the rise in archetypal storytelling, if you're counting up superheroes in media and television and TV shows about gods, you see since the birth of the computer age in 1970, there's a 10x rise in archetypal storytelling. When archetypes start to fail, that's when we turn to the apocalypse, right? So this is the complicated reduced to the really simple. And by the way, same metric. If you're tracking apocalyptic media, you see a 10x rise since 1970.
Yeah, as a side note, a book that I've been working on and off for the last 10 years, embarrassingly to say, is called Rewriting the Human Story, How Our Story Determines Our Future. And is looking exactly into the lack or the collapse of the common shared story as a prerequisite of what you call cooperation, for example, right? And how that then prevents us from solving shared problems.
I think, by the way, it's just to build on that. This is exactly why Peter and I wrote We Are as Gods. We wanted, because you can't, right? If you're going to do cooperate, you need, exactly as you pointed out, a shared mental model. You need everybody starting the same way. This is true. I study flow and peak human performance. There's group flow. Where does group flow begin? It begins with collective ambition. That's basically a shared mental model and a goal. That's the origin. So we agree with you, like at a really deep level, and I like this is one of the reasons I wanted to write the book. And in fact, a lot of our promotions are multi-book buys, simply to facilitate. Like, I want to buy this for my whole team. I want to buy this for my family. And we wanted that happened with abundance, and we saw it, and we wanted to make it easier this time. So a lot of how we sort of have been marketing the book has been to facilitate those conversations.
Okay, you mentioned already information overload. So where does that phenomenon come into play here in abundance?
Yeah, so this is
because the paradox is, in a way, and I think that's a paradox that Edsger Dijkstra pointed out originally, if I got this right. The paradox is that computers are supposed to simplify our lives, but the paradox is that they end up making our lives a lot more complex and complicated than we originally anticipated.
I think that is foundationally. I'm a very slow adopter when it comes to personal technology. Extremely slow. For a guy who literally like works on the cutting edge of technology, unless it's a neuroscience tool that we're testing in my lab and trying to do something that way, I'm incredibly slow because fundamentally, I don't think any technology is going to, like, I think it's a lie, the idea that you're going to get more efficient by technology. It doesn't seem to make you more efficient. What it does seem to do is make you more powerful. So it's going to take more time, but you're going to get more work done. This is, by the way, one of the fundamental things that's been happening with AI. Everybody's running around going, AI is going to make me more efficient. Sort of. You're going to work longer hours during your days to actually work with AI, but you're going to get more done in a month than you could have before. So it gives you a kind of power, but it actually takes more time, makes you less efficient in certain ways. It just makes you more powerful. So you can take on bigger tasks, go after bigger goals, but it's not going to increase local efficiency, which is really weird. But let's go back to where you started, which is information overload, because I want to throw some numbers around this, because they're sort of shocking when you actually look at the numbers. So back in 3000 BC, this is the first year we really have written language, right? So for the first time, people are writing on deer skin, and they're cutting hieroglyphics into rocks. So we've had cave paintings and things like that, but we haven't had written language so far. Buckminster Fuller computed that, or added up, that the rough equivalent of all the data created that year, 3000 BC, is 1 gig. So 4,000 books, the equivalent of 4,000 books. Now, mind you, this isn't the number the human brain evolved to process, right? Which is probably a lot smaller. It's just a good metric for, like, this is what it was like 5,000 years ago. When we write abundance, it's 2.8 zettabytes. That's 4,000 trillion books. So we've gone from 1 gigabyte to 2.8 zettabytes, which is enormous and insane. 10 years later, we are up to 181 quadrillion books. That's 181 zettabytes. It's the amount of data created in 2025. So it's also worth pointing out that the bandwidth of attention, all the things we could focus on at any one point, is about 120 bits wide. And the bandwidth of working memory, what you could think about at once, it's 4 concepts. So we created 181 zettabytes in 2025, and we've got a bandwidth that's 120 bits wide. This is the problem. This is like the modern issue. Now, here's what's downstream from this. I what I'm about to sort of walk you through, I've been calling exponential leadership syndrome. That name is totally like it's already out there, but it's wrong. In the beginning, I started to see this in leaders. I run a very sort of high level, exclusive, intimate mastermind for really big business leaders, creative leaders in the world who are going after really big challenges. And it's the only time I work one-on-one with people. It's the only people I work with. And I started to notice a lot of them up against this. And then I was like, oh, wow, that's interesting. It's showing up in these creative leaders. Maybe this is a leadership thing. And I called it exponential leadership syndrome. And then I started to see it everywhere. And so I'll walk you through it very slowly. It's got a bunch of steps, but information overload, too much data is coming in, right, on all the fucking screens, produces cognitive overload. Big surprise, right? Working memory can hold 4 concepts. So, of course, our brains are tapped out all the time. What's the immediate impact of cognitive overload? Fractures attention. It's really hard to focus. There's too much to focus on. This is all of us all the time. And the next step is familiar to everybody too. It's decision fatigue, right? When you don't know what to focus on, the next thing that goes is your ability to choose, right? Barry Schwartz calls this choice paralysis, but like it's the difference between if going into a supermarket and they've got 2 grape jellies and 400. When you're up against 400, the brain goes, I don't fucking know what to do. I don't want deli. I'm done. Like you walk away. It's choice paralysis, decision fatigue. Decision fatigue is really sneaky because when it gets harder and harder to make decisions, it starts to create what's known as meaning drift. So things that used to mean a lot, now you're like, why am I doing this again? What is it? What? What's the purpose of this? Right? A lot of people were feeling this with their kids. Like, wow, education used to be this amazing thing that guaranteed a job. And now does it mean what it used to be? Are we sure? Right? That's an example. Meaning drift tends to produce fear, and that erodes creativity, erodes motivation, innovation, and resilience. And once that starts happening, this is all of us right now, really bad during COVID, it goes directly to burnout. And burnout is an actual legitimate sort of mental health condition. It actually changes how the brain processes information. It's an illness. It's very hard to come back from. But when you sustain it, which we really haven't seen before at this level, it leads to some really bad issues. One, adaptive rigidity, which is I'm out of options. I don't know what to do. And performance theater, which I think is everywhere. I'm just going through the motions. I'm baking it in my marriage. I'm baking it in my job. I'm baking it in society. And finally, you end up with identity collapse. I literally don't know who I am at all. And we're seeing this everywhere. Like this is literally every conversation. One of the craziest things about going out on book tour to promote this book is everybody I talk to is having like, they're like, yeah, this is me. This is everybody I know. Right. Like this is society at large. So this is, by the way, you asked earlier, why do you need a survival guide? This is why you need a survival guide.
Yeah. And you mentioned an important word there, meaning. So talk to us more about the interplay between meaning and purpose on the one hand, in the context of abundance on the other hand. How do those play together?
Yeah, these are great questions. So let's just start with meaning and purpose because that's the easier one. So I study flow, right? It's an optimal state of consciousness where we feel our best performance. Any of those moments you get so focused on what you're doing that everything else starts to melt away and performance goes through the roof, right? That's flow. And one of the things we know, and this was, my first book on flow was West of Jesus. It's my second book. And in West of Jesus, the subtitle there is Surfing Science and the Origin of Belief. And this was one of my first questions because it very much seemed like, even going back then, and now we know this really well, that flow underpinned meaning, well-being, overall life satisfaction, purpose, belief, happiness, like all these things. All that's happened since that time is all these things we thought were true are now, like psychologists have a new definition of happiness. Flow is built into 2 tiers of that definition. It's baked in. We know, not only do we know flow underpins meaning and purpose, we know the opposite. So we know that a lack of flow erodes meaning, erodes purpose. Like we've seen all this stuff. So all that is very solid. And there's a couple things that sort of matter here. So what leads to flow? How does the brain make meaning? One of the really important details is challenge, and another is purpose, right? Challenge is I want to be stretching, I want to be learning, and purpose is I want it to mean something in the world. It's got to go beyond me. And purpose is often talked about, whether, often talked about as a very altruistic thing. And it is. I want to help the world. But from a performance standpoint, it's totally selfish. So passion is a phenomenal motivator. But if you look at what's actually motivating people in passion, it's two neurochemicals, dopamine and norepinephrine. These are very selfish neurochemicals. They're excitement, they're energy, they're great. But they're only two. If you add purpose to it, if your passion helps the world, now other people are involved. You've got pro-social neurochemistry. So you're not only getting dopamine and norepinephrine, you're getting endorphins and oxytocin and anandamide. And that's a lot of feel-good neurochemistry. It's just more feel-good neurochemistry than you could possibly get from passion. And that's why, it's one of the reasons at a really basic, simple level, purpose matters neurobiologically. It gives us access to more pleasure chemicals. And these are immune-boosting chemicals and performance-enhancing chemicals, but you get more of them with purpose. And from a next level up in the human performance standpoint, motivation sort of gets you into the game, but you need goals because that's how you steer. And it turns out the human brain functions best with 3 tiers of goals. We need clear goals, like a daily to-do list. What am I going to do today? Those work best when they point at high, hard goals. These are like, today I wrote my new book. I wrote 500, 1,000 words in my new book. My high hard goal is finish the book, write this book. And that the book is on flow and intuition. And this points at a purpose, which is advanced flow science, right? And training, that's a purpose. So like the brain wants 3 tiers of goals. It functions best when it has, immediate, what am I doing today? Those are pointed at multi-year. I'm going to write a book. And those are pointed at an overarching purpose. I want to advance flow science and training, right? That's sort of how that stack works in my own life. And so purpose from a human performance standpoint, it's really important, right? It tends to underpin meaning, right? When we are accomplishing really hard goals that are aligned with our purpose, that's our most authentic self. That has all kinds of performance benefits and psychological benefits. Now, that's the purpose side of it. Let's talk about your second half of the equation very quickly, which is what's the problem with abundance. So at the end of the book, we talk about a very famous experiment run by John B. Calhoun. He created a perfect mouse utopia, perfect mouse world. Calhoun's a ethologist. He studies animal behavior. And he, in the 50s, was like, no, I'm seeing kind of all this commercial success and commodification and sort of like the American dream. And he was worried about, we were moving towards a world of abundance. What happens to people in a world of abundance? Nobody had ever asked the question, right? Like every other utopia had failed, sort of, right? These were silly questions. They weren't serious. He was like, no. I'm seeing this happen. Let's look at it. And it was a disaster. Their entire mouse society collapsed, and it collapsed in bizarre ways. It wasn't just, there was some overpopulation, but like males either became super hyper aggressive and would attack anything that came there, or they collapsed into like, basically they would groom themselves. All they would do is sit and just groom themselves all day long. Females lost all of their maternal instincts. They would literally like push nursing babies off of them, step over dead bodies. Like it was crazy, degraded behavior in a world of abundance, which was the thing. Like all their needs were met. They had space, they had water, they had food. It was great. And it completely collapsed. And it collapsed because of a lack of challenge and a lack of meaning. That's the issue. In a world of abundance, as we move into a world of abundance, and there are really big arguments over when here and when. So Peter is much more optimistic. He thinks this is next 3 to 5 to 10 years. I think we are on a 25 to 35 year. I think the time horizon is much smaller or much longer. Maybe it's somewhere in the middle between both of us, but it doesn't matter. We're moving in that direction. We're seeing it, right? Like we live in a world of abundance compute right now. There's more smartphones in the world than there are people, and they're all supercomputers, and that's a world of abundant compute, right? Like we're there. Couple other things are working like this too, and it's not going to slow down. When is an open question, but you can see how it's going to erode meaning, how it's going to erode purpose, and how it's going to erode challenge, and how it threatens all these things. So our point is, it used to be in a world of scarcity, meaning was sort of created for you automatically. You survived, you procreated, you took care of your kid, like meaning automatically, like work, child rearing, all that stuff, meaning, instant meaning. Once that comes off the equation, we have to make meaning for ourselves. And that means we have to actually understand how our psychology and our neurobiology function. And we actually have to take these steps. Otherwise, everything I just laid out for you, meaning drift, identity collapse, like the modern world will take it from you. It's taking it already. All that's going to happen over time is the volume is going to get louder. So we have to take over the responsibility. Again, that's why it's a survival guide for the age of abundance.
Yeah, I loved that part of your book. And I think it's crucially important because even before the interview, I was talking to someone on LinkedIn who gave me who wrote an article about this whole mouse experiment. Maybe it was called Universe 25 or something like that. I forget the name. And he was like, make sure you ask him about this. And at the time, and I was like, sure, okay. So I was taking notes, but I haven't read your book.
What the hell is Universe 25?
Yeah, and so I haven't even read your book at the time. And then on the weekend, I was reading your book, and I was like, oh my God, look at this. They already put this in the book. That's amazing. And so in depth, by the way, which goes on to show you that, when we're too busy struggling to survive, we are automatically gifted with the meaning and a purpose, which is do not die. As Jerry Seinfeld says, don't die, don't die, don't die, right? But once that survival struggle is taken away from you, then it seems like in equal measures, perhaps the purpose or meaning of surviving diminishes unless you deliberately and consciously replenish it and replace it with something of your own choice that serves that same function. And that's why, by the way, I've been looking for the last 10 years of the power of story in that kind of context specifically. And I call this the context effect, but that's a whole other digression. So let me go back here to Jerry Seinfeld and the Dalai Lama, two people who have touched my life profoundly, and give you two quotes and ask you for a response. So the Dalai Lama once said, and that's kind of all in the context of AI, because AI is the biggest driver of those exponential changes that we're witnessing everywhere. So here's what the Dalai Lama said. We don't need more intelligence, we need more compassion. And Jerry Seinfeld added, we're smart enough to invent AI, dumb enough to need it, and so stupid we can't figure out if we did the right thing.
Where do you want me to start?
Whatever is more appropriate for you.
Okay, so let's start with the Dalai Lama and compassion and those ideas, because it allows me to close the loop on something I said earlier. And then let's have the AI conversation. So I said at the start of our conversation that I was trying to solve cooperation at scale, and I was looking at these technologies that do that. And so there are a lot of sort of wisdom traditions. So let me start at a different place slightly. So my original training in neuroscience is technically in the field of neurotheology. My mentor is Dr. Andrew Newberg. He's the godfather of the field of neurotheology. This is the use of tools of neuroscience to study so-called spiritual phenomenon in the brain, right? So
Wow.
like Andy made his name because he was the first person to work with Tibetan Buddhists and look at oneness with everything, cosmic unity. Where does that come from? He looked at Tibetan Buddhists, he looked at Franciscan nuns. I met Andy because I was seeing it in athletes. Surfers would talk about being one with the wave and things like that. So literally he had just done that early research and I was seeing it in flow. And I called him up and I was like, I'm seeing this in athletes during this state we think is called flow. Could it be the same mechanism? And he said, like, this is how I got my career. He said, I don't know. Let's figure it out. Like that was literally how my entire life changed. And I started really working hard on neurobiology. Here's the funny thing. It's 25 years later. And Andy Newberg is, I just told you that we have a textbook coming out in July. It's the founding textbook in the field of performance neuroscience. And Andy Newberg is again in the textbook and it's meditation studies. So what was neurotheology 25 years ago is now performance neuroscience, right? That's what's changed in society a lot. So that shift is sort of necessary here to understand what I'm about to say. We have gotten very good at sort of looking at things like group flow, brain entrainment, brain synchrony, like how do teams work together really well, what happens in the brain, the entire field. So my chief science officer of the Flow Research Collective is Dr. Michael Menino. We're both actually on staff. Well, I'm a distinguished research fellow at Florida Atlantic University at the Center for Complex Systems and Brain Sciences. This was founded by Scott Kelso. And Scott is the godfather of coordination dynamics, which is literally like the network level of the brain. How do neurons talk together and work together? And how do we coordinate across scales? And it's the foundation of what's known as social neuroscience. So we stopped looking at individual brains and we started looking at multiple brains together. When a team is brainstorming and it's really freaking working, what's going on? When they're not, when there's no psychological safety and the team is falling apart, what's going on? So we've got all this. Not only do we have all this, we can measure it, and I can literally. You can send me a Zoom camera, a Zoom meeting of a Zoom recording of a team meeting you have, and my chief science officer, myself, and a couple other people have a new company. Go to teamsandflow.com and check this out. The company's called Synergy. And what we've been able to do is through a Zoom camera, using semantic analysis, we're measuring the vein in your forehead, we're doing pupillometry, we're doing a couple other things, a lot of face reading. We can tell you the level of psychological safety in the room, the level of trust, if there's brain entrainment, so if everybody's brain rhythms are, if there's synchrony, if you're heading towards group flow. If not, we can fix it in real time if we want, or give you an after action report. So this is a commercially available, it's on the market as of 3 months ago. This is commercially available, cooperation at scale, through Zoom meetings in technology. What's also happening is like sort of the technologies that go a little bit farther, the technologies of compassion. This is where I'm going back to the Dalai Lama. So we know how to produce loving kindness meditation raises compassion. And we know this is what the Dalai Lama compassion meditation has been talking about. We know all the impacts of it. We know what's going on in loving kindness meditation in the brain. We have to flow makes people automatically more empathetic. So if I train you in flow, I'm getting greater empathy as a result, and so forth. So all of the technologies of compassion and the really cool ones, oneness with everything, is the ultimate. What Andy Newberg discovers, when you're one with everything, you're obviously compassionate for everything. This is sort of the core of it. We are now able to create a lot of these experiences technologically at scale. We can tune for them. We can use a lot of new coming neural technology to do it. There's, the crazy one that we talk about at the end of the book is there's now, so psychedelics do this as well. They make people one with everything. And we're now getting individually customized psychedelic therapy. So you want to trip for 4 hours with oneness with everything and compassion with no after effects, down by dinner, blah, blah. We're starting getting to the point where we can build that stuff. So these tools are really at our disposal for the very first time. That's really cool. So that's the Dalai Lama side of that. Ask the Jerry Seinfeld AI question again, and let's talk about AI for some of the time we have left.
Sure, yeah. And if you want, I'll repeat the quote. We're smart enough to invent AI, dumb enough to need it, and so stupid we can't figure out if we did the right thing.
So, one, I disagree with Seinfeld on the last bit. So stupid we can't figure out if we've done the right thing. I actually think that's a sign of our intelligence, not our stupidity. I think, and in fact, one of the most interesting things I think that we're seeing with AI is actually we're seeing a backlash. I've at a level I've not seen before. Literally, not since nuclear power have I seen a backlash like this. People are, I know very few people who like it. I think a lot of people are like, okay, I like working with it in a limited range, but I prefer a world without it. I keep hearing it all over the place. Like I've never heard it before. And I think it's going to lead to some really interesting AI legislation. I think we've gotten to the point we watch social media break the world. I always tell people, like, you had this experience. Social media came out, Facebook happened, and for the first like 2 weeks, you saw that technology. You were really excited. You felt really connected to the world. You felt great inside. It was amazing. Oh my God, all these friends. I'm a lot safer and more networked. And then 2 weeks in, we started to feel a little rotten feeling in our gut when we used the technology. We started to feel a little bit more lonely, a little bit like it was a little addictive, and we ignored it. And that was the largest mental health crisis in history. That's what we were ignoring. The largest, right? We have an abundance of social media and some led to an abundance of mental health issues. That's it. That's the dark side of abundance here. I think we're seeing the same thing with AI, only this time because of cognitive offloading. It's right. It's coming for our cognition. It's coming for our creativity. I think it's causing a tremendous amount of problems. And we definitely need rules for how to work with AI. We do that in the book. My lab has spent a lot of time looking at how do you work with AI to not get stupid, amplify creativity, amplify cooperation, amplify the good stuff, avoid the bad stuff. I think we're at the front end of this, but I'm interested in sort of like the pushback here. And so when I hear this final, and we don't know if it's good, I think, oh no, this is a mark of our intelligence. Thank God. Right. Finally. Right. Where I got scared is a couple of years ago, I was at an event and I heard the head of AI alignment security at Claude, basically, who was a young guy. He was maybe 30 years old. And he told a room full of leaders, about like 500 leaders. He's like, no. We know what we're doing with AI safety. You have to trust us. And my jaw hit the ground, right? I was like I almost walked out of that moment. My instinct is no, I want to punch you, buddy. Trust you, I want to punch you. And they were just groans, and I was like, this is insane. And I was so happy to see, that people are now, walking out saying, no, this has got to stop. We got to, I love all that. I think that is a mark of sanity. I think the AI revolution is massively overhyped. I think people's timelines are wrong. I think most people are talking about AI as becoming conscious, and they don't actually know what that term means. And they actually mean agency, and AIs have had an agency for a very long time. So the thing they're scared about, the thing can make decisions on its own. Well, that's been 20 years old. It could do that 20 years ago. So that's not if that's your fear, we were there 20 years ago. Shut up. So I think there's a lot of false statements in the media in the world. And I think a lot of AI experts are making them. I think you hear the timetables for when things are coming to take our jobs, and it's laughable to me. It's laughable. I'm you're out of your mind. Nothing like that has ever happened in history. It would have to be a literally historical anomaly. Unlike anything we've ever seen. And I'm not saying it can't happen, but this is a mega black swan, in my opinion, versus anything that's real.
Let's talk a little more about that pushback, though, because my admission to you is that I was reading your book together with two others, kind of opposite books, and they were kind of setting the full spectrum.
What did you read at the same time?
Yes. So, well, yours I was reading as a digital copy. Eliezer Yudkowsky book I was listening to as an audio book, taking breaks from reading your book, for example. And so Eliezer Yudkowsky's book is If Anyone Builds It, Everyone's Dead. And it's a New York Times bestseller. And in the end of chapter 10, he says this: The challenge AI presents is not surmountable with anything close to humanity's current level of knowledge and skill, and attempting to solve it with everyone's lives at stake would be an insane and stupid gamble that nobody should be allowed to try.
Well, um, I've heard that before. So have you. We've all heard like that. So my problem with these huge overblown statements are, wow, dude, that's a huge overblown statement, and we've heard a lot of it before. So even if you're right, what are you doing? Two, I kind of agree. I think we all kind of agree. Like, I think we are playing like with fire at a human at human scale, like we've been doing with a bunch of other things. I think that is real. I think you could. I've heard all these things. I mean, synthetic biology was ringing alarm bells a lot louder than AI, and has been for a lot longer. Right? I've heard all those things along the way. Like, this is not again, that strikes me as apocalyptic thinking. This is what happens when you can't deal with complexity, and this is a way of collapsing it. And my point is not that the dangers aren't real. My point is that historically it progresses in a middle path. There are going to be unintended consequences of the middle path, but it's rarely the apocalypse on the end. So everybody wants us to stop AI or whatever it is to deal with the apocalypse, and maybe that's the right case, but I'm Hegelian. Like, it goes this way, it goes this way, it goes back. We're gonna go back and forth. And I sort of like to. I always tell people I'm not a futurist. I don't do that. I'm actually trained as a scientist and a reporter. I look at facts and where things are, and that's all I know. That's the extent of what I can tell you. And based on what I'm telling you is like, yeah, do I think we should find ways to slow this thing down? Yes. I think it's insane. I think that just saying, hey, wait a minute, this could cause global unemployment alone, forget everything else. Just saying that and social unrest says, oh, okay, let's be smarter about this. As far as I can tell, the U.S. trade war with China is mostly in the U.S.'s head. And if we started to behave differently there, that and in fact, when I looked at when China made when they made DeepSeek open source, I think that was a sign that they got what was going on, and it was time to play ball differently. And we've ignored that here in the West, but like I think there's a lot of people who are trying to be sane here, and I agree with all those statements. I'm not. I don't. I think there's wisdom there.
So okay, so
one last thing I want to say. I also think that most of the people who are making huge statements about AI are either like people right at the cutting edge. They're coders and they can't see past their milieu. I do not believe that the technology is nearly as powerful right now as people say it is. I always say to people, if you think your LLM is super powerful, try to write a book on it. See what happens. Right? You'll quickly find out that most AIs, even the LLMs, have a memory that goes back a couple thousand words unless you instruct it otherwise. And it can't really parse an entire book, can't do it. And so all the things you would want the AI to do at the expert level as a book writer, I'm not talking about it makes sentences that are maybe better than a bad writer can do, but what I would need a technology to be able to do to help me, it's nowhere close. My experience is, oh my God, this technology is so dang limited. Not, oh my God, I'm blown away. And I've heard this from everybody I meet at a professional class, with the possible exception of coders. So we're hearing pronouncements made by coders about a technology that is having the biggest impact there, and they think they can speak for the world. And when has this been true? When has pronunciations out of like the core tech world about how things work in the world been true? I haven't seen it yet in my life.
Well, there's a couple of issues there. One is the issue about the power and capability of the systems as they stand, but the other is about the power and capability of their designers or users or creators, which is to say us, to control them, right? And both of those have to be kind of true. in a sense that we are presuming that if we are creating, we'll be able to control them. And I
I
mean,
don't think there's any. I don't think anybody believes that, especially now with OpenClaw and agentic AI. I think the data is really clear that the AIs are. We're not going to be able to control them.
right, but if we can't, and they turn out as Grok turned into a mega Hitler, for
Right.
example, uh, in literally 16 hours, just like Tay did, right? And if they have reached the level of power that they're not at currently, but they're projected to supposedly reach there with exponential growth, etc., then we'll be in real existential trouble. Or so goes the argument that,
Yeah, and
aliens.
Nicola, I've been making an argument since we sat down about cooperation at scale. This is why, right? Like, this is why. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm saying, yes, maybe we're wrong on the scale. Maybe we're wrong on the timetable. Maybe we're wrong if we could put it back in the bot. Like, all those. But, like, one thing that I think is obvious, wow, we need some global cooperation on these issues because nobody has those answers. That's
But okay, so let's break down a couple of things here. So first of all, those are not my thoughts and my thinking. That's Eliezer. My thinking has actually been historically for the last 17 years on the cooperation idea. So the whole purpose behind my blog and my podcast, which started in 2009, was the idea, and my background is in ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, ethics. And the idea was technology is not enough. It is necessary. It is insufficient. It is the how. It is not the why. And if you have a very powerful how, but not the right why, you end up doing more damage than good. And so I've always been pushing about the idea about figuring out the why and about cooperation, which comes out from that shared story, which currently, unfortunately, it seems to me is falling apart. Which is uh, so so this is kind of like my bias, if you will, and my kind of impetus behind doing the work that I've been doing for the last 16 years. Then you come in with yours, Eliezer Yudkowsky comes in with his, and we're trying to have a conversation here that all of us learn something hopefully from each other, and from we are able to overcome our biases, which you talk a lot about in your book, by the way, in a very enlightening way, I may add. So, and part of the, by the way, problem with global cooperation is something which I would call straight out hypocrisy. And that's why, for example, for me, the techno philanthropist argument doesn't hold. And that's personally where I believe now, is because, on the one hand, all of them have come on the record publicly in support of legislation. On the other hand, they have spent hundreds of millions of dollars. Hundreds of millions of dollars. There's a super PAC, $120 million. There's several other much smaller ones which explicitly are designed to squash any legislation that tries to be imposed to kind of control or direct them, right? So that's kind of like where I struggle with seeing them in a positive light as individuals. And there are some exceptions. I'm willing to grant you that Bill Gates has done tremendously good work with his vaccines and stuff, and that's why I think he's the best example, in my opinion, for a techno philanthropist.
so. I will tell you two things that's worth pointing out. We see the headline techno philanthropist as you circle back here, but one of the things, like, look, I train, as I said, this high level mastermind. There are a bunch of billionaires in this mastermind. Every one of them is using their money to do something kind of amazing in the world. They're going after really global challenges. So, like, there are headline grabbing people, and yes and no. Again, I said I've always had problems with that idea, but I will say that I really do see, that like, I see people who could have very easily just like never worked again, you know, always had an interest, blah, blah, blah. And they're choosing to like bet everything they own on, crazy abundance driving bets, which is really cool to see. There's no way around it. It's cool to see.
I can give you 4 different ways that come from a book that I recently read that are called The 4 Principles for Designing AI Systems for Optimal Human Performance. And they are things like seamless interface, immediate feedback, personalization, and autonomy plus mastery. Those
Yeah, I mean,
you're
basically going through what we wrote in our book as well, right?
That's exactly what I'm jokingly trying to say.
Okay.
But why don't those people take those great ideas that you have in your book and start working on them? For example, since they're the ones who have so much leverage, so much power to actually implement
one
those.
thing I will tell you that I think is maybe not in their favor, but a lot of the stuff that is in the book is new. You know what I mean? Like I train a lot of people, and I'm always massively surprised by how many people sort of at the top of their field know so little about how their brains actually work and how they like. So I think a lot of this is about like the information spreading. I hope We Are As Gods does that, helps with that reason. Because I'm going to be charitable and say I think the reason is ignorance, and hopefully we can fix that. Right, like that's my answer there.
And I hope it is the case. And I would love to be proven guilty and wrong, because your 4 principles for designing. So let me be clear. The principles I just quoted previously are straight out from your book. And they're the 4 design principles for AI systems for optimal human performance, which, by the way, smack very much of like the conditions that are required for bringing one into flow.
Very much. I mean, very obviously, optimal performance is optimal performance, right? Like that's what I always say when it comes to peak performance. People are like, "Well, what is peak performance?" And I'm like, if you stop and you think about this, you already know that answer. It's getting our biology to work for us rather than against us reliably and repeatedly, right? It can't be anything else but that. Of course, that's what it is, right? Like it's where we just have our biology. It's getting it to work really well, and I think of it that way. And I think, design principles are there. I will say one of the things that I think really has to happen sooner rather than later, though, is the interface design stuff, because I don't know so it wasn't my group, but it was a related group, did a study of executives using AI. And we found that top executives using AI to write emails for a month lost their grammar skills, their writing. They literally couldn't write an email anymore. And let's point out that none of these people were probably like great email writers to begin with, right? But they literally lost their ability to sort of write emails. And there's sort of this new work on AI burnout, which is obviously not surprising. We're all experiencing it. And what one of the things that I think is so interesting, it has to do with like information processing capacity of the brain, is used to be in the world of like card catalogs. If you wanted to sort of overload yourself with information, you had to spend like 2, 3, 4 hours in the library. You could do it, but you would spend some time in the library. If you wanted to do it with Google, you still would take an hour or 2, right? Like, because you still have to research things and back them, get to right. With AI, you can do it in 10 minutes. Like you can literally take yourself out for the day in 10 minutes, and you can burn yourself out over time. So these are things that are solvable with interface design, right? Really solvable with interface design. These are interface problems, and ways of like sort of building the technology so it interacts with us in slightly different ways. I hope this happens sooner rather than later, because it really is sort of coming for our cognition. And the one thing that we can't afford here is these like sort of like the unintended consequences, right? We saw it with GPS. We stopped remembering maps. We saw it with smartphones. We stopped remembering phone numbers. We saw it with the Google effect. We stopped remembering facts. But now it's creativity and cognition. And we don't want to get to a point where like that's gone. Like that, once that starts getting eroded, we have real problems.
Yeah, Stephen, unfortunately, we're in the last 3 or 4 minutes of our conversation. So I just want to say quickly, this is, by the way, what you are referring to in your book as cognitive offloading and the dangers thereof, which is a phenomenally important point. You also talk about the 10 commandments for AI augmented creativity, uh, which I think are fantastic, and kind of everyone should perhaps print them out and keep them in mind while or before using ChatGPT or Claude or anything else, just so that they don't end up like those CEOs who are unable to do basic grammar after a month of sending emails with ChatGPT.
Yeah, it's funny. If there's a moral in the book, right? It's the moral is that if you want to kick ass over the next 10 to 15 years, here's the formula. Humans in flow who can collaborate with AI and each other, right? Especially creative leaders in flow, creatives in flow who can collaborate with AI and each other are going to own the future. This is very, 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 very clear. And it's also clear that, like, as I said, those 10 rules, this is because, my lab is funny in that, like, I always, people ask, do you work with AI? I was like, well, we used to call it machine learning, but yes, that's how you do neuroscience, especially computational neuroscience, which is what I do. So the answer is yes here. But we start, because of the abundance and because I work in neuroscience and because my chief science officer is also an AI expert who actually just stepped down from running the largest AI graduate program in America. We've been looking at this for a long time. We were 6-7 years ago. We were like, oh, wow, this is coming. This is getting really, really real. And this is going to have a human impact. So we sort of started studying, well, what is that impact and how do you mitigate it? And what are the rules here? And that's sort of where those 10 rules came out of 6 years of looking at this. I think, I don't think this work is done. I think we're at the front end of this work. I think, like, my lab, we helped start it. The book will help popularize it. I think this is the core of our field, or the future, the field we need for the future. I think I'm excited about this field, actually.
Stephen, my favorite quote, last two questions, by the way. My favorite quote from the book comes out towards the end, where you say, imagination is the final frontier. But I want to ask you this. If we are already being AI that supposedly or allegedly imagines, generates, and creates, is imagination still uniquely human, or is that the last frontier already being pushed on or pushed by?
So this is great. So I made a statement a second ago. Humans in flow, collaborating with AI, right? So why is that? Why is the future going to be humans in flow? We talked a little about performance and its impact, but it's really this. Of the skills trained that get amplified in flow, one of the biggest is lateral thinking, outside the box thinking. This is divergent thinking. It's the connecting of really far-flung ideas together, right? Humans are really good at lateral thinking. Edward de Bono did this work back in the 60s. It's a very trainable skill. It's not trained that often, but we're really good at it. Humans in flow are extraordinary, really extraordinary. The numbers go through the roof. It's like a 600-700% boost in our lateral thinking abilities. And there's a bunch of neurobiological reasons for it. We know why it happens, but AIs can't do that. They're convergent thinking engines. They're LLMs. They're built to converge on ideas, right? The most probabilistic next word is what they're going to give you, next token, right? That's what they're doing. They can't do divergence. Now, yes, you can get under the hood. You can change your temperature setting, and that will make it sort of like widen its ability to find patterns, but it doesn't. It's still bounded. It's still following rules. It's still doing sort of convergent work. So I believe the best of both worlds is humans have this amazing skill that AIs can't do it, and we know how to amplify it to an incredible level. And here we have AI, so divergent plus convergent, that's the most power, that's the most leverage, and that's the most innovation, right? So whatever else is true, we've got some problems. we're going to have to innovate our way out of them. This is the best way forward. So while I'm nervous about the AI technology, I also think the collaboration is really interesting, and that and done right, carefully, I'm super excited about where it leads.
Steven Kotler, we've been talking today for 85 minutes or so, and we've touched on a variety of topics. What's the single message or the one most important thing that you want to send us away with today?
So it's the message I always sort of like to leave people with is you have no idea of what you're capable of. This is the lesson of studying peak performance is like most of us have no idea what we're actually capable of. We're all capable of so much more than we know. And the messaging we are as gods is that like, I think we need that now. I think the world needs all of us working, as hard as we can together. I think a real world of abundance is closer than it's been. We can solve grand challenges like never before. And I think the responsibility, godlike technology comes with godlike responsibility. We've been really good on the godlike technology part. We've been shitty on the godlike responsibility part, as far as I'm concerned. And so that, like, if that's the takeaway, is you're capable of far more than you know. And please use that power responsibly. Is if there's a moral, I guess I haven't phrased it that way. It sounded kind of silly coming out of my mouth, but there you go.
Well, funny enough, that's kind of, if you want me to rephrase it a slightly bit, that's kind of the problem that I've been working on, as I said, for the last 16 years. For me, the challenge that humanity is facing, the greatest grand challenge that humanity is facing is one of wisdom and ethics. It's one of the discrepancy or gap between our power and applying it in a smart, non-self-destructive, useful manner. And that's the challenge. That's not the technological challenge, but it's more a challenge of character and ethics, perhaps, rather than anything else. And that's where I think the crux of our survival or demise would lie.
I don't disagree.
Well, Steven Kotler, thank you very much for being with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.